Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Okay, good afternoon. We are here today with Matt Soper, who is our state representative for District 54, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And we have some questions to ask him. And we'll start out by saying, give us a little bit about yourself, Matt. Tell us a little bit about yourself in about a 3-minute time frame.
Sure, no, absolutely. And I'm pleased to be able to be here today with both of you. I'm Matt Soper, and I was born and raised in Delta, Colorado. My family came to Delta back in 1887, so we've been in the area for quite a while.
Native, I would say.
And before that, they had lived in the San Luis Valley, and then before that in New York, and then England before that. But you have to go back at the founding of our country. I have been passionate about politics ever since I was in high school. That's when I met my state representative, who was Matt Smith at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder how long it's been since someone from Delta has ever served in the legislature. And when I was elected in 2018, I was the first person from Delta to serve in the State House in 54 years. And that's quite remarkable.
It is.
For me, I had always been about public service and really this passion of giving a voice to the folks who don't have a voice, those who live in the small, rural, independent communities. And I have shaped my life to try to be able to be the best public servant. After Delta High School, I went to Mesa State College, where I studied political science. Then I jumped the pond to Edinburgh, Scotland, where I earned an LLM in public international law, focusing on maritime piracy. And then I earned my LLB in British law, so I also have a British law degree. Back across the pond, where I earned my American law degree at the University of New Hampshire, where I met Sarah, who's my wife. We actually met in the law library, so very studious, and she's a patent lawyer. I never really practiced law. Instead, I had worked for an NGO, had formed my own consulting firm back with that, and then ran for office and was elected then in 2018, and have served now for almost 3 full terms, and I'll be running for a 4th term next year. It's definitely been the honor of a lifetime to represent Western Colorado, and I would truly say this is the best job really there is, because I see my district as being one where I'm the only person who can say they represent 99% of all the commercial peach orchards, or the independent communities that are, Fruita, Loma, Mac, Colburn, Debec, Gateway, Delta, Palisade. Each town has their own school, their own main street. They have their own identity. It's all about farming and ranching and orcharding. And yes, we have vineyards, so we have a good time as well. But we have a common identity, and so that makes representation really special, because I know that I'm that voice of rural Colorado. And there's not many of us left that can actually say that.
No.
Exactly.
In your bio, it states that you came back home to your hometown of Delta to fight for rural Western Colorado and their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like to you? What is Western Colorado's way of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our way of life really is being a strong, independent community. And strong doesn't necessarily mean big city. It means that you have the ability as a city council or a county or a special district to be able to decide how you want to live your life, what your community is going to look like, what those values are going to look like, free of someone from Denver or Washington telling you what to think, how to breathe, when to walk, what exactly you have to wear or do. And I've found that it's been really frustrating when you have these big jurisdictions that just want to nanny you all the time. They want to come in, and they, in keeping you safe, they take away all your freedoms to even take a risk. And that's just not the America that I grew up in, and that's not the America that our founders envisioned. Our founders took an amazing risk when they decided that they didn't want to be part of Great Britain anymore, and they wanted to chart a new course. And that was an amazing risk. I mean, if they wanted to choose the easy nanny state path, they would have stayed the course. They would have paid their taxes and kept their head down. But I've found that to represent that rural way of life, it really is the ability to take risks, to take challenges, to be able to live your life within the law. I mean, you shouldn't violate your neighbor's rights, but you should still be able to not have someone from Denver dictating how to live.
And do you see Denver trying to do that frequently?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how do they try to do that?
Yes, all 5 years that I've served in the State House, I've seen hundreds of bills during that time attempt to try to tell us in rural Colorado how to live our lives. So one example would be the governor pushed Senate Bill 213 this year, which would have been a major land use code for the state. Well, historically in Colorado, land use has always been a local government issue. And for the very first time, the governor got upset with local governments, and he's like, well, I will just do it my own way. I'll just pass a law through the legislature, and we'll do it all big government from Denver. Well, luckily, there were enough Democrats who agreed with us that we killed it in the last week of the session. But it's coming back. I mean, the same issues are going to come back as well. And it's all under the guise of affordable housing and that local governments aren't doing enough, and therefore the state can do more. But a town may have a very specific reason why they're not approving more building codes. They may not have a large enough water treatment plant to supply enough domestic water to add additional homes. And those are very real considerations that the state would never even consider. And that's just one example where the state's trying to tell us how to live our lives, because as locals, we need to be able to look at the issues and say, our growth pattern can only be 3% a year, because that's only the growth that we can grow and afford to be able to have enough domestic water or enough sewer or enough trash pickup to take care of the new residents that are coming into our town. That's just one consideration.
You've about answered the questions that I had right off the top of my head, all in one felt swoop. Matt, with that consideration, do you consider that one of the biggest challenges that you have facing you for the next time you're in office?
Yes. So I will serve an additional 2 years in the State House, and then I'll be term limited. Without question, the urban-rural divide and the widening gap between conservatives and liberals, and I'm going to start calling them socialists because that's the changing nature of the Democrat Party. It's getting deeper and wider. And then rural Colorado, particularly on the western slope, is getting smaller because the Front Range is growing percentage-wise greater than the western slope. So it means I'm in a double minority. I'm both I'm both a Republican. Let's edit that out.
Yeah.
I'm both a Republican and from the western slope. So that's the double minority. And when I go to Denver, I have to put on a diplomat's hat and be able to know that I'm outnumbered 6 ways to Sunday, but I still have to communicate to people who have no interest in giving us an inch. And I have to be able to tell them why certain policies are going to be bad and use the only tools that I have in a diplomat's toolbox, and that would be the power of persuasion, the ability to build relationships and explain why something is not going to work. And then inviting lawmakers from the Front Range out here to the Grand Valley, which I've done multiple times this year, because I believe it's important. Even though members may annoy me, and I may have a lot of difficult times with some of the things they have said and pushed and gotten into law, we still have to keep trying, because if we can get sympathy on just one issue, and that's the vote that helps stop the worst legislation coming down for us, it was worth it.
Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. What bills passed last session? Because we saw there were 203 bills that passed, or 205, whatever. What had the most impact on us? Because frequently, when the Daily Sentinel covered it, it didn't say what the bills were or what the impact was. So what would you say were the most important for us to know about and that impacted our way of life or any sort of freedoms or abilities?
Sure, no, absolutely. From this past session, I think some will be very difficult to know right at first. So I'm going to jump to a couple sessions ago because it will be more relatable for those who are listening to the podcast. So one bill that was recently passed was a plastic bag ban. And that just went into effect this year. Mm-hmm. So just because a bill is passed 1 year, usually what will happen is there'll be a 1 to 2 year lag time before it's actually implemented. And so that's when you see the full effect. So this year, we can still buy plastic bags for 10 cents, but starting January 1st of 2024, all plastic bags will be removed from all stores, with some exceptions that I was able to work out when the bill was being negotiated. And that is for farmers markets, for fruit side stands, for any bulk things, for example, in a hardware store like dog food or bulk vegetables or hardware. Anything like that can still be in a plastic bag. Also an IV bag and any sort of hospital use bags are still fully acceptable. But that would be one thing that directly hit us. One thing we did last year, I opposed it vigorously, was a 27-cent fee on any deliveries. So anything you buy from Amazon, there's a 27-cent delivery fee, and it doesn't matter on the value or how much. Mm-hmm. So you could have $1 million in furniture being delivered from Grand Junction to Aspen, 27-cent delivery fee, and it could take 5 trucks, but still 27 cents.
Right.
Or you could have one pizza box being delivered to me from Pizza Hut, and it's 27 cents. So percentage-wise, it actually hits the poorest among us more than the wealthy. A bill I ran this year got rid of the 27 cents for small businesses.
Okay.
And then it allowed all other businesses to pay the fee directly, because one of the hardest parts of implementing that for business was there is no software designed to track deliveries. It's all designed to track dollar figures because that's how businesses pay taxes. So a tax based on the number of deliveries, businesses were spending way more money trying to comply with the law than the law was actually costing them. Mm-hmm. So that was the change we made. I really wanted to see the full 27 cents go away. Right. It's horrible in my mind. But
and what was it for? I know it's a delivery fee because I got it on a Pampered Chef thing, and I was going, what? 27 cents for what?
Yeah, it's for improving our highways.
Oh my Lord! I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just another highway tax. In my mind, it's highway robbery.
Exactly.
But given the dynamics, we're outnumbered in the State House 2-1, so I could peel off a couple of Democrats. It doesn't matter. Unless I can get enough to get a bill through the chamber, which is 33 votes. We only have 19 Republicans. You can do the math. That's 14 Democrats I would need to find.
For every bill.
Yeah, that's just a straight hill climb. So if any compromise is going to happen or any bipartisanship is going to happen, it's because we as Republicans made it happen, which is really sad. I don't see anyone from the majority party coming over to our side of the aisle saying, hey, I want to help you guys. I'm going to jump on your bill to help give it a clear path forward. No one has ever said that to me.
Question on that end of it is it because they do have the D behind their name that they feel like they need to stay true to form rather than common sense, which would say, now wait a minute, this guy may have a point. He might be Republican, but he has a point. Is that what you see happening?
It is. So that's the partisanship I talked about, getting deeper and wider. And so a lot of times when you're talking to Democrats one-on-one, and you'll try to convince them to vote for your bill, they'll say something to you like this. And I've heard this many times. Matt, I'm sorry I can't vote for your bill because it's going to fail. And why would I stick my neck out on the line for something that's going to fail? I should save my political capital for something else. And I will usually respond by saying, well, you're one of the few Democrats who represents rural Colorado, and you need to have a backbone because it's a symbolic statement to show that the entire Democrat caucus was not locked down to hurt rural Colorado. And that it was really the urban legislators hurting us in rural Colorado. But so far, that's rarely seen. This session, that was the one glimmering hope from this past session was, I would say, rural Democrats found their backbone. So I have to give Dylan Roberts and Megan Lukens a lot of credit. We worked on some wolf bills to require what's called 10J, a rule from the federal government, before wolves are reintroduced on December 31st of this year. 10J says you can use lethal means to kill a wolf to protect your livestock, your family, others, pet animals. And it has to be in place before wolves are introduced. Once wolves are introduced, 10J cannot come into force, and it's the intersect between federal and state law. Well, we ran a bill saying that Prop 114, which brought wolves into western Colorado, but not the eastern slope, that when it specifically says in 114, the department shall take the necessary steps to introduce wolves by December 31st, 2023. And we argued take necessary steps does not mean paws on the ground. And that...
I like that, paws on the ground.
One of the essential steps is you have to have landowner buy-in. And the only way to have a modicum of landowner buy-in is to allow them to use lethal means to protect their property, to protect their livestock. And that has to be in place before wolves are introduced. And so our bill was the insurance policy to say the 10J rule had to be in place before wolves could come to Colorado. And the governor vetoed that bill.
Oh, no.
It's one where both Republicans and Democrats from rural Colorado joined forces. We picked up some interesting support because we had to find, like I said, 14 D votes to be able to even get it to the governor's desk in the House. So there's just a few rural Democrats. The rest of the votes we had to find in interesting places, like the governor's neighbor was willing to be one of the votes to help send the bill to the governor's desk. So those are areas where I did find that there was a few Democrats in rural Colorado who found their backbone. We're a changing state. Like I said, we're becoming more socialist. So I think there's a number of those Democrats who are really concerned that the values for why they were a Democrat are starting to leave them. I can't, as opposed to what a Democrat actually believes in, because it's hard for me as a Republican to put myself in their shoes.
Right.
But I can tell you that there's a rift starting to happen. And that's good news for Republicans. But we've also got to be really smart as Republicans if we're going to win some seats, because Colorado, I believe, as a whole, wants balance to return. And the only way you can have balance is for us as Republicans to win either the governor's seat or either the House or the Senate. Because that's the only way you have that balance again. That's the check and balance. Our founders specifically divided power between a House and a Senate, a governor and a Supreme Court. But they never contemplated what happens if it's all one political party and one political machine that basically is controlling all those members. That's basically a monarchy. And that's really what we have here in Colorado. And without having something that breaks up that power, we will continue to see more centralization occur here in Colorado. But I believe that when I talk to Coloradans across the state, what they really want is balance to return.
And what would you say are the best ways for individuals in Colorado to say, how can we return that balance?
Yeah.
I know voting, but...
Voting's the best way. I've heard, I know we talked earlier about how can you trust the voting system. I'm just going to dive into that here.
Oh.
I don't think we can, honestly. But I also don't think we can give up voting either. Because the best way to lose elections is to not vote because you're saying your vote doesn't matter anyways.
Right.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, that we still have to show up and we still have to vote. Now, I will tell you, I am going to take my ballot directly into the county clerk's office.
Right.
I'm not going to let it sit in a post office box. I'm not going to let it sit in a ballot box. I'm going to walk it straight into the office, and I'm going to hand it straight over because I want to make sure that it actually gets to the place that it was supposed to go to. But we do need to think about the fact that it doesn't matter who you are. It's completely fair to always be questioning, do we have a secure election system? And people on one hand may tell me, Matt, we have the most secure system in the world. That may or may not be true. I don't know. It could be. But on another hand, I also have a lot of constituents who tell me they don't trust our election system. And that may or may not be true either. But what I do know is that in 2016, the Democrats accused Russia of election interference, was how President Trump got elected over Hillary Clinton. You move to 2022, what we heard was, it was Dominion that was rigging their machines to keep President Trump from winning re-election. But both parties, in a short span of time, within 8 years, had a point in time when they didn't trust the election system. And that we should be willing always, each and every year, to say, let's come in, let's test it, let's make sure it's secure, let's have high school and college kids do the best they can to try to hack the system or get into the system. Because that's the only way to really show the public that we're actually doing something, and to put the ballots online, which is what Mesa County has done. And I'm very proud of Mesa County for doing that. Other counties like Delta County have been doing that for a while as well, and it really does bring that peace of mind knowing that you may not be able to identify your ballot, which you shouldn't be able to do, but you could actually go back through and recreate the election. And it may take a long time because here in Mesa County, we're talking 100,000 plus ballots across the county. In some place like Delta County, we're talking 24,000 plus ballots. So, it would take a long time, but it at least gives the public transparency and access. But that's not the same for most counties in Colorado.
Right. Okay.
And I know there's always a call to return to the paper ballot. Why wouldn't that be a good system where you come in and you vote, and that's, as a citizen, that's a privilege that we've gained, and you just go vote and your ballot was there. And because employers, I know when I first started voting 400 years ago, that's what you did, and employers gave you time off and said, you have the right to go vote. And you went to your precinct and you voted and you identified, you said, yep, this is me, and they said, yes, this is me. I was a poll watcher up in Austin for when I was doing political science too.
Okay, cool.
and a legislative aid, but you just did it, and it didn't, they had all the election results by 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
It seems odd to me that now it is so convoluted and so expensive when it shouldn't have been that expensive in the first place.
I would agree. I was a international election observer for the British 2010 elections in Scotland, which was fascinating to watch. They brought all the ballots to a major gymnasium, and they had all these stacks, and were shuffling the stacks, hand counting back and forth. They were able to count quickly because they only asked one question on the ballot. So you only voted for your member of parliament, and then collectively the members of parliament named to the prime minister would be. Our system's a bit different because we can vote directly for our governor. We also vote directly for your member of the legislature. We also combine it with ballot questions, which most other locations don't do that. If you're voting on a ballot question, you're only voting on the one question. So it makes hand counting a lot faster and a lot more accurate. But I remember when I was young, just like you, I'd sign my name. They check to make sure your driver's license matched the name in the poll book. You'd get your ballot. You'd go to the polling booth, and I remember the little punch things that we had.
The hanging jab.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you'd submit your ballot in, and you got your I voted sticker. That was a really proud moment for me. But the reason why we're not going to go back to that system, and it's not that I don't want to, but why Colorado as a whole won't, is we've had an all mail-in election for now 10 years. It came into force in 2014. And in 2013, with that election, already over 80% of the voters were requesting a mail-in ballot. And because that was the case, county clerks actually then came to the legislature and they said, it actually would save us money to not have to be sending all these letters out. Do you want a mail-in ballot? They send us a letter back saying, yes, I do. Then we mail them a ballot. So they saw that as costing the taxpayers money, where they could actually send a ballot out to everyone, and you wouldn't be paying as much as the back and forth in postage. Well, I think that's probably true. I think it's probably a good economic argument, saving the taxpayers money, a good convenience argument. It also has holes in that system.
People move, and they're sending that ballot to that address, and they're not receiving their ballots.
Yeah.
And
well, and I don't know if this is because people move, but I have a P.O. box. It's always shocking to me around every election time how many ballots I see in the trash can in the post office. And I don't know if that's because someone gets a ballot and they say, well, that's not my name, and they throw it away. Or they say, well, my vote doesn't count. Why would I send it back? And they throw it away. Or they say something like, it's too much hassle to try to figure out how to buy a stamp, and they throw it away, which
too much hassle.
which wouldn't make a sense in a post office.
Right.
I had never even thought about that being a problem. I'll be darned. Well, live and learn, right?
So are there any proposed issues that you know are coming up next legislature that we kind of need to be aware of and could maybe push to help on a conservative side, or something that's going to be harmful to the western slope and probably beneficial to the eastern slope, like introducing the wolves only on the western slope? That seems a little unfair. If you think
Except that they've
wolves
got
are important,
to consider the fact that wolves have 4 legs and they can cross the mountain, and they will.
I hope they do.
They will.
Hope they find their way to Boulder.
we could hurt them.
So we're just now starting to hear of what might be coming next session. I can tell you that last session was so rough and so hard on everyone that it's really been a pretty quiet summer, which is probably good. But just now members are starting to talk about what they might be trying to do next session. One thing I can tell you will be 2 different ballot measures to amend the state constitution. And of course, the devil is in the details.
Oh, yeah.
So one of them stems from both stem from a Colorado Supreme Court case. The first case was where the court said, it was the Davis case, that a person who was accused of murder could still receive cash bond to be released back out to the public, because even though we did away with the death penalty here in Colorado a few years ago, it used to be that if you were accused of a capital crime, you were not allowed bond at all. Right. No personal recognizance bond, no cash only bond, and no indemnity bond. So that was not a possibility at all. And so it's a loophole because that was repealed. The death penalty was repealed. So the effort now is to say that if you're accused of something that would have been a capital offense, and really that's only murder, then you would not be allowed to have a bond whatsoever. And so that's probably one that will be sent to the voters to vote on next November in 2024. The other issue also stems from a Colorado Supreme Court case. Actually, it stems from one of my bills that the court declared unconstitutional, which is always interesting. They even quoted me in the case, which also made it interesting. But we were looking for a way back in 2021 to be able to find institutions that covered up rape and sexual assault of a child under their protection to be liable. And we did put damage caps for both private sector and public sector entities being sued. But think like public schools or like a scout organization or a daycare. Those would be the organizations that really would be collected up, because they're the ones who market themselves for taking care of kids and having responsibility to take care of kids. But if they're going to suppress information and hide it away so that person can't make a case, then they really need to be liable for that. Well, what the court said is the reason why it was unconstitutional, in their opinion, not in mine, was that it was substantially similar to the elements of another crime that already exists in Colorado. And that because of that, the other crime already had a statute of limitations that was 6 years, and that once that expires, no claim could exist. When you create a new cause of action and you don't have a statute of limitations, then there are no elements to be barred. So you could move forward freely with it. So the court said that because of the substantial nature, that therefore they were at least holding the main provisions of the bill unconstitutional. The damage caps, interestingly enough, they didn't declare unconstitutional, which is a good thing in my mind, because we were able to increase the low-level damage caps for a government actor to being almost the same level as for a private sector actor, which would be about $500,000, and then up to $1 million if it was the court had a finding that it was just a gross hiding of information. So there's an effort by some to amend the state constitution to ensure that at least some element of that bill could be constitutional. I do worry about that, and the reason why is the devil's in the details.
Right.
And I'm really, really concerned that if the wording is broad, it can revive a lot of stale claims, and people who believe that they're not going to be liable, or insurance companies who have based their entire insurance policy for a business or a school district around a certain statute of limitations, that if they are successful with taking it to the public and amending the state constitution, all of a sudden you could be liable for, I mean, as long as a person was naturally alive and could sue, that entire time span. And to me, that is one step too far, which is why we tried to control it in a statute, and that's why I was part of a statutory effort, because I could have a means of controlling how that language looked. But once you do something to put on the ballot to amend the Constitution, it needs to be fairly simple to pass. And if it's fairly simple, in my mind, it's probably pretty broad, which is probably a bad policy.
So where could people get information specifically about some of those issues that are coming out? Do you produce and say, in our view, this is not going to be a good, because we have the blue book that comes out, but oftentimes it doesn't give you the whole picture. It gives you, we don't always seem to have on the conservative side somebody that's saying, okay, well, but look at this, what this would result in. Do we have anything that we can get ahead of time? And
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And where?
Yeah, so this session I have decided to have an aide and an intern. I've kind of run the gamut from going through a session without any help at all, and I nearly killed myself off, to having one aide, and now I've decided that as a more seasoned lawmaker that I can oversee a couple of guys and be able to do more for my constituents. And part of that is being able to produce a newsletter that comes out about every 2 weeks while we're in session, with the goal that it's not just going to be something to get people excited, but to actually give them real meat and potatoes, to tell them, here's what's really going on, and to have a little bit more detail to talk about that backstory. Because it's the backstory that really helps inform voters of the policy. And from that, I would like this to be able to be something that could be shared. So it could be, from the county party to men's club or women's club, or Stand for the Constitution, or any other organization, an HOA. I mean, I would like it to be good enough that even a city council member would feel safe to share it. That's the type of quality I'm aiming for. Because I do find that there's a lack, that the newspaper is not doing a good job of covering legislative issues. And when they do, they don't really tell you the story. And the story is what's important.
But you've got to have things leading up to what the action is. So, and they don't.
This goes to, I know when I served as an intern in the state legislature, one of the things, and even way back then, we had so many lobbyists and so much information to read all the time. Do you feel like when you're presented something, I know Cody Kennedy was telling us for the weekend he had 424 pages to read for city council, and I'm thinking that doesn't seem reasonable that somebody can digest that, understand what are all the implications, even with an aide. 424 pages over a weekend is just way too much. And do you always feel like you have enough time to process the legislation that you receive and to be able to communicate that to other people? And what do you think? This is kind of a two-part, so you can say, take this apart. What impact do you think lobbyists have? Because I know we got a lot of information from the lobbyists.
Sure.
And they said, well, course, you're getting one side. This is why we should go ahead with this.
Well, I'll take the volume, and then I'll take the lobbyist side question. So on the volume of reading side, no, there's not enough time to read everything. So you have to triage and prioritize what you're going to be reading. But the system can also make it specifically hard for members. And a good example would be on the third to last day, I was specifically subbed on to House Appropriations Committee. And our caucus will do that whenever there's a big bill. I guess I always draw the short stick, and they usually want me on the committee. No, that's a joke. Actually, it's a tremendous sign of respect for my colleagues that they see me as being well-read and able to ask questions, grill really smart people to try to put them on the record for what's really happening. And they placed me on House Appropriations so I could hear the bill that goes along with Proposition HH, because they had the resolution and then they had the statute, and they were two companion pieces. Well, the statute version that implements the resolution, it came out 3 days before, and they handed me the bill as I was walking to committee. It was still hot from being printed on the printing press. I sit down. I like to look at bills on the public website because A, it's a pretty good public website, and B, I feel like I should be seeing what the public's seeing. So I don't actually look at the legislative pages that we have, because in my mind I should be just working in full transparency. So I always open up my laptop, pull up the bill on the public page. It wasn't there. That's how new the bill was. We were starting a committee hearing to consider a bill that the public could not even see. And I immediately raised an objection saying, look, it's not fair that you gave me this bill as I walked to committee. It's still hot, but it's not even online for the public to see. And we're starting a hearing and taking testimony. The public should have enough time, and even experts that we're going to bring in to present, reasons for or against the legislation, should have reasonable time to be able to read and formulate a reasoned argument to present their case to the panel as to why this particular policy should advance or fail. And without that being possible, I said, we can't go any further at all. And we stood in a very long recess while they put the bill online, got it updated, and then they started. But our first witnesses made me proud. They said, well, I didn't have time to review it, but I'm against it because, and they perfectly explained why, that it was a process foul. But even beyond the process foul, we had to ask the bill drafter, could you go through this section by section, because I didn't have time to read and contemplate it and study it. So I'm going to take time, and I expect the committee chair to give me this latitude to find out what's in here and to unpack it. And so no, that's a case where specifically they tried to cut off our time so that we didn't know what was in it. They wanted us to just vote for it and to push it through to the governor. And we said no. As a matter of fact, that was one of the reasons why we chose to walk out on the last day of session. I led the House Republican walkout. They were invoking Rule 16 and Rule 14. Both rules are designed to shut down debate by not allowing the opposition party to speak, or any member of the chamber to speak. Just have to push your button, yes or no. And we were trying to negotiate to get to say a few words on another amendment that was being run on the same bill I was just talking to you about. And something's not ready when you're amending it on third reading, which is really supposed to be the formal vote, not a time for amending. And they were running like 10 amendments. So we were trying to negotiate being able to talk on the next amendment and reduce our time down to a fraction of what should be allowed. And I said, I've had it. I put my laptop in my bag. I walked around. I told our Republican minority leader, I'm out of here. And we've talked about if it hits that point when a member's ready to leave, that we're all going to join them. And he said, okay, we're done. He grabbed his cowboy hat, put on his hat, and he followed. And together, all 19 House Republicans left the Capitol. We reconvened a few minutes later on the west steps of the Capitol, right below the House chamber. And it was really a symbolic moment. It was the first time in state history the Republicans had ever done a walkout. There had been walkouts at other times in history, once in '96 by the Democrats and another time in the '80s and the '60s. But it's incredibly rare. It's so rare that actually you can find notes in history books on when it happens. But we chose to stay on the West Steps because that's where the public comes to protest grievances by their government. And for us, even though we are members of the chamber, we're minority members, so we don't have a say in what really becomes policy at the end of the day if the majority party doesn't want to listen to us. So our only ability to protest against having our voices shut down was to stand on the same steps that everyone else from the public stands on to protest their lawmakers in the floors above them. And that's how the session ended. So it was just this moment in time that was just very powerful, that really showed, I think, a lot of Democrats how upset we were for having our voices shut down. And the saying is, the majority gets their way, but the minority must have their say. And you've got to allow the minority to stomp their feet, explain why something's bad, and their job is to sit there and listen. And if they don't want to take it, compromise. Address our concerns, but they were unable to do that. As far as volume of reading, I first will read, of course, all my bills, all the bills in my committees, and I serve as ranking member on House Judiciary and House Health and Insurance Committee. Any major bill that's in the news, I will obviously read. And then other bills, quite frankly, I don't really have time to read. So I rely on my fellow Republicans who sit on the committees of reference to see what their opinions are on those bills, and to see what the votes are on those bills, because that's the only way you can do it. I mean, we'll consider between 500 and 600 bills per session. That's a lot. I mean, the average bill length is something like 7 or 8 pages. So you multiply 7 or 8 times 500 or 600, and 120 days. It's really not humanly possible for one person really to read all that, because then you have amendments as well that are floating around. I typically have run more amendments than anyone else in the chamber. I believe that it's a mechanism, to either complain about why something's bad, or I'm more likely to sit back and, on all the stuff I have read, be like, well, that's an issue that we could change, and I could fix this, and we turn that around, and I'll usually explain to a member, we do this, this, and this, and your bill can be at least palatable, and they may look at me in shock. But I'll at least be trying my hardest all the time to try to represent our part of Colorado the best. And a lot of times that means that you may be unsuccessful, but you keep trying, and you keep trying again. And it's kind of like William Wallace, the great Scottish war hero, said that he had seen a spider spin a web, and the first 5 or 6 times the spider failed because the rain came and destroyed the web. But on the 7th time, the spider built a strong enough web that he was successful. And I have found that in the legislature, that you keep trying and trying and trying again, and eventually there's those times where you are successful, and you know that that's why you're there. On the topic of lobbyists, lobbyists are a necessary evil. I overall like lobbyists. I have found that they provide a lot of good information. They will supply you usually not only with why they want you to vote for the bill, but they will even tell you what the other arguments are. I mean, they'll try to, of course,
minimize.
Exactly, minimize what they're telling you, or make the arguments seem a little bit better than maybe they really are. But they'll still tell you the pros and cons. And in Colorado, it's kind of bizarre. We have Amendment 41, so lobbyists can't even buy you a cup of coffee, for example, which is probably a little overly strict, but a good thing to keep money away from legislators.
Exactly.
But the problem that has existed there is, in the old days before Amendment 41, I had been an aide for Ron Tech and Jack Taylor. They were state senators. And what I could remember is lawmakers from both sides of the aisle would go out, they would have dinner, maybe have a drink, but they would be able to bond and get to know each other and talk shop and talk about where they're from in Colorado. That now rarely happens because lawmakers are paid very little. They, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your party label is. Everyone's a little bit frugal. There's not necessarily a willingness to eat out too much. And so it just makes it very difficult to really connect with even your own colleagues or peers across the aisle. And so you really don't get to know each other that well. And because it's a relationship business, it means that unless you're trying extra hard, like I've really been pushing it, because I mean, this is the only mechanism to try to have some Democrats be sympathetic at all to our needs. Otherwise, they're in their camp and we're in our camp, and more things become party line and less amendments are accepted. And that's not good public policy. I need them to accept some amendments that would help us in Western Colorado, especially if the overall bill is not good for us. Lobbyists are oddly enough making more than they ever have, because you can read about it every session about how many more hundreds of millions of dollars are spent by clients on lobbying. And it makes me scratch my head, because aside from their cars becoming nicer in the parking lot, I can't really see what they're actually buying, because they can't pay for anything for a legislator. So maybe I'm still naive, and at some point someone will reveal what's really going on here in Colorado. But there are certainly more lobbyists and more money involved in the system. But I'm not really seeing what it is that people are actually getting for their money. I think a lot of people are just throwing checks out there for anyone that has the ear, especially if someone with a D behind their name. Lobbyists are the institutional memory, because lobbyists have no term limits. When term limits were first enacted, the average tenure of a lawmaker during that first wave, so think locally Matt Smith and Gil Berry were in that first wave of post-term limit legislators. The terms went from an average of 4.3 years to an average of 7.8 years. So this is in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. Well, now what we've seen is, now it's dropped back down to 4.1 years is the average tenure of a member of the State House. Well, that should be really concerning, because, I mean, I've now served 5 years. I'm going into my 6th year. I have served longer than, let's see, I need to get this right because some members have changed, than, 57 members out of the 65. Which, as a relatively young guy at 39 who's served 5.5 years, I shouldn't be such a senior member in the legislature, or at least in the State House. It's a little bit different in the Senate, but in the State House, it's so short, because it's either it's really hard. Partisanship has increased. Long nights have gotten longer. Members certainly realize that it's not the ability to do what they thought they could do, and so they don't really put in the effort, and they're like, well, I've had my time, I'm going to move on to another job. And that's been really hard, because when members want to know, well, what's the history of this policy, you go out and you talk to the lobbyist in the hallway, and that's why lobbyists wield so much power, because they're the ones that house that knowledge. And they'll say things like, well, 30 years ago we tried it, didn't quite work, but let's give it another go this year. Well, that's wielding true power, because they're able to influence a legislator at a level that the public doesn't have.
Right.
Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that's okay.
Okay, then we're going to change gears here just a little bit, because I know your time is limited. So you volunteer with the homeless, right? Okay.
I did. I have to admit, during the pandemic, I pulled back on my volunteering.
Okay. All right. Well, still, we can ask you this question: is what can be done with the escalating number of non-conforming homeless in the cities throughout Western Slope? Non-conforming is the big word.
Yeah, I mean, homelessness is a major problem, and it's gotten really big in Colorado because we were the first state to legalize marijuana, and a lot of individuals came to Colorado because they either had dreams of getting rich from marijuana, or B, this was the place where you could loaf around and just be high all day. A lot of homeless from other states came here because of that. So as other states saw their numbers drop, Colorado saw our numbers just go sky high. And it doesn't matter if you're in Grand Junction, Delta, or Denver, homelessness is a major problem that's getting worse all the time. I actually believe in some ways do-gooders have made the problem worse. And I never thought I would say that. Through my church, we've always been ones to really help out, and Delta as a community banded together, and we built a homeless shelter, no government funds at all. It was raised by the churches. They came together in that rare moment of, I mean, you normally never have, the Mormons and the Catholics and the Adventists and the Baptists all participating together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they did to build a homeless shelter and to take care of the need for the community. And I would volunteer about every week. And what I observed was, over the course of a number of years, there were some that were our own in the community that really did just need a helping hand, and we were able to help them out. We could get them back on their feet, and those were the stories you loved. Others clearly had mental illness, really should have been in some sort of a state hospital. Of course, we don't have those anymore. But the state also has a real problem with, they call in the wait. So it's for IDD, intellectual and development disabled individuals. And there's not enough places like homes or even state-funded homes for those individuals to go. So they end up really just roaming the streets because families can't take care of them. They may or may not have a family either. And so that was the third category of homeless. The second category of homeless were, I would say, the most troubling to me, and the ones that we should be most hard on. And it was the fastest growing category of homeless. Those are the ones who didn't want to abide by society's rules. They didn't want to work. They didn't want to pay taxes. They didn't want to have to abide by any civic duty. They didn't want to have to obey anyone, such as a court or a judge. They wanted to loaf around all day. They wanted to accept whatever dole check came out to them. Healthcare, they had Medicaid, their Obama phone. They had just enough cash and could do enough underground dealings to have alcohol, marijuana, and other hard drugs to basically party all day long. And this second category, they would freely say to me, Matt, I live a great life. I party all day long. I go to the homeless shelter, watch a movie or two, go to bed. I have a really nice dinner. I sleep, maybe in a dorm-style setting, but the next day I have breakfast. I get to go out. If it's cold, I hang out at the library, and we just do dope and get high and drink and inject other drugs. And he said, life is a party. And that's what's troubling. And that's why it's that second category of homeless we have to be really tough on. And that's why I think that we can't just have a homeless shelter and say all three categories get to be there, because one category we can deal with because they have mental health and we can push them aside. The other category, yes, they need a helping hand, and perhaps kind of having a few uplifting beds, absolutely, we'll get them back on their feet. It will only take a matter of days or weeks. But it's that category that's increasing of those who don't want to have any responsibilities in life and party all day long. Those are the ones we have to be really tough on and say, no, I'm sorry. No more government resources, no more handouts, no more warm beds, and no more free meals. That unless you're going to take steps to make your life better, like the first group, or you have such a mental disability or handicap as the last group, if you don't have either one of those, I mean, if you're not trying on one side and you don't have such a disability on the other side, then what are you doing to receive all of these benefits? We should cut off the benefits and say, either you can live on the streets, but we're also going to tell you where you can't be. And I think it's fair to push them into, like Delta's done, a designated location out of sight where, they have a porta potty, but they can camp there. It's not very nice. It's kind of an old dump, but it's the tough love approach is the only way to break certain individuals, because when you give people too much, they will continue to take and take and take.
So they couldn't loiter on the streets and say, like, we have some friends that in their business, they come and sleep right in their, underneath their thing. So the people are afraid in the morning to come because they're aggressive toward
It has
them.
a chilling effect on the business.
Yeah. Well, I want those people to come to my business. So in Delta, if you had that, you would say, no, you can't stay here. We will physically take you to that location.
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
It sounds like a good plan.
It does sound like a good
Yeah.
plan. I think Grand Junction needs to seriously look at what Delta's doing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's a point where other people don't know of other ways to deal with something that's been successful, and so
Oh, absolutely.
once they see it, they go, "Oh, that's much better for us." This one's going to kind of go a little bit on the COVID idea. But
and I should tell you, we're kind of running out of time, so I could
okay.
probably.
Time.
You are running out of
Yeah,
time.
probably just have time for one more question.
Okay. So how do we defend against unconstitutional executive orders, like the masking and that sort of thing? What is the best way? Because we see them trying to push the COVID again.
Sure.
And saying, well, we think you might need to mask up again, and we think we might need to close schools again, and it's just not necessarily what everyone would want to do, and it's not good for us.
No, I agree. Unfortunately, I will tell you the danger of having a law background. There's a couple of really dangerous Supreme Court cases that are sitting on the books. One from the smallpox epidemic, and the other one from the Spanish flu epidemic. The smallpox one, Massachusetts had implemented a fine for not conforming with certain sheltering orders, and a man continued to go to work and was hit with the fine. He argued his case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said that a state may take reasonable means to protect the health, public safety, and welfare of the citizens, including from a virus such as smallpox, in according to what they believed was the best policy at the time. The other case from the Spanish flu comes from, I believe, Michigan, but it's somewhere else in the Rust Belt if it's not Michigan. And there, the court said that it concerned whether or not the government could suspend payments for certain loans and whether that was a takings from a bank. So a bank is expecting to receive a loan payment every month. The government froze that during the Spanish flu pandemic, and went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that that was reasonable for a government to take steps to freeze loan payments to a private business, and it didn't violate the Contracts Clause of the U.S. Constitution because it impacted everyone within the state. It was not isolated to one particular business, and that it was specifically tailored to allowing people to have resources to weather through the worst stages of the Spanish flu. That being said, we haven't really seen, I believe, some of the cases that I expected to appear before the U.S. Supreme Court yet. I do know some of them are still working their way through the circuit courts, and we could expect to see something before the U.S. Supreme Court probably in the next year or two that are directly tied to what happened in 2020, 21, and 22. And I believe this U.S. Supreme Court is likely to overturn one or both of those cases that I just mentioned because they were very poorly decided cases. I don't necessarily believe that we'll see another mask order or lockdown order or even an order telling landlords that they can't accept payment from tenants, just because I personally feel like, this is not based on anything except my gut feeling, that so close to what we went through in 2020, it doesn't matter what your background is. Most Americans are probably like this. I don't know, unless bodies are piling up in the street. I'm not likely to comply with anything out there. Just because as Americans, we still have that rebellious gene that was what helped make us free and independent in 1776. And that gene still runs within most of us. And I really do find that it'd be pretty hard for a government to enforce that nowadays. I think 3 years ago is a little bit different because for, I'd say, pretty much everyone living, we had never weathered a pandemic. So I think there was a fear factor that helped compel compliance. I think now that fear factor's gone and Americans are like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to worry too much about it.
Exactly.
Well, we appreciate so much your time, and we hope you'll come back.
No,
Because,
absolutely.
I mean,
We still have unanswered questions.
No, absolutely.
And we'll
Yeah.
get
And
more.
trying to get an appointment with you is
Yeah.
almost
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but now that we
problem.
connected here, we'll be able to connect better next time.
All right.
Sounds
Thank you,
great.
Matt.
No,
very
okay,
much.
thank you. I appreciate it. Well, thank you.